Well, it's another great session here at Christian Thinker Society. I'm Jeremiah J. Johnston, and I want to welcome you. I'm so excited to welcome to this week's broadcast Mary Jo Sharp, the founder of Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry. Mary Jo, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for stopping by with us. I want to give you a wonderful introduction because you are doing some very exciting things. I've been counting down the weeks for you to be on this program. You've got some exciting things in store for our audience, and I'm excited to hear from you. Mary Jo, of course, has an MA in Christian Apologetics from the wonderful Biola University, and she is engaged in some incredible scholarship. You have forthcoming books with Kriegel Publications on some very innovative things that you're doing with apologetics and women's ministry. And it's not just theoretical material, Mary Jo. You're actually doing it. You're out in the field. You're doing it. You're battling. People are implementing these strategies, and you're already seeing just incredible results. So I'm excited to hear about this forthcoming book. I got a pre-release copy of your article that's also forthcoming in the Bill Craig, Paul Copan edited book. I think, is it Come Reason Together? Is that the name of it? What is the name of the book?
Come Let Us Reason.
Come Let Us Reason.
Yeah, Come Let Us Reason.
And that is a phenomenal article that you have contributed to that scholarly and very popular book as well. So I'm excited to talk to you about the exposure that we have with Islam and the distinctions of treatment of women in Islamic fundamentalist faiths with Christianity. Also want to just share that Mary Jo is a member of the Evangelical Philosophical Society and, of course, the Evangelical Theological Society, and is a certified apologetics instructor with the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest evangelical convention in the world. Mary Jo, God is moving mightily through you. I'm excited to hear from you. So welcome to this program, and I hope that we can have you on again and again because you've got so much to say. I know we can't cover it in one program.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, Mary Jo, I first became acquainted through you and your wonderful scholarship, your lectures, your teaching abilities through your ministry, Confident Christianity. And that every time I say that, I just feel more confident about my faith. How did you get the vision to, you're the founder of this wonderful ministry. How did this vision come to you? Can you talk about that wonderful name, Confident Christianity? Where does it come from? And give us the vision for your ministry of where you see yourself and where God's taking this dynamic ministry.
All right. Well, that's great. Those are great questions. I actually, when I began this ministry, it began as a blog post that was a homework assignment from Biola University. We had a choice to do for the Defense of the Resurrection class. We could either do an email, a conversation with an atheist who obviously would be arguing against the resurrection, or we could do a blog and defend the resurrection on a blog. And so I took the email route because it was a whole lot less public. And it seemed, I guess it was much easier, because you didn't have to put it out there in public, all your views and let them get hammered. And I never felt right about that. I never felt like, if you really profess to believe in God, you should be able to defend it in public, to defend that belief in public. So I went ahead and I felt convicted about doing the blog. And I went ahead and started a blog with a friend of mine from Oklahoma. And we were batting around ideas for, what is it we want to convey? What are we trying to tell people? And about the Christian faith. And one of the things we wanted to say is that we have confidence in our belief in God. And as we taught other Christians in apologetics, we found that that was the one thing that people really felt like they were lacking, was a confidence in what they believed. They could say, well, I believe in God and I've gone to church all my life, but when I get around somebody who asks me questions about that, I'm not confident to answer those questions. And so that just kind of spurred on the ministry name of Confident Christianity. The vision for Confident Christianity would really be to train Christians in order that they may become more confident in what they believe, so that we ground them in reasons for the faith, and we ground them in that, so that they do become confident, but also to provide challenges to people who do not believe Christianity is the way, and engage those people in discussion on these issues, showing that yes, we are confident to discuss our beliefs in public. So those are the main reasons for the title, as well as for the vision for our for confident Christianity.
Well, and you're being very modest because, I mean, what began as a homework assignment, and we won't give too much credit for them for that, okay? I mean, God is blessing you now mightily. You're speaking all over the country. You are a keynote at all the apologetics events, and God is really using you to really stir a new movement of women getting engaged. And you're speaking powerfully, Mary Jo. And so I want to hear, I mean, what's the ultimate vision? Where do you see Confident Christianity going? I mean, it began as a blog. It's helping training believers, and that's phenomenal. But what's the ultimate vision, and what's God laying on your heart for the future days?
Wow. Well, since I actually never planned to be in this spot, I plan to actually, I don't know if you know this about me, but I was a band director. I taught band. So I've been somewhat letting God lead and guide me, but as he's been doing that, I've seen that we're going to be doing more conferences that Confident Christianity helps to sponsor, that we're going to be doing more speaking, more research, especially in the area of Islam. I want to, like you have noted, encourage women to get more involved with apologetics. And I'm doing a lot of work specifically across the state of Texas in women's ministries, encouraging them and getting them excited to reason their beliefs. So that's another thing I'm going to continue with is carrying on in the women's ministry, maybe affecting it at the national level as well. And just continuing to do work also in student ministries, really getting to those teenagers. We do this in our own church and also do it up in Seattle with a group called Jesus University. And we'll be also helping to put on hopefully an apologetics track, or not a track, but a conference on the side of the EPS conference specifically for youth that will be sponsored by Biola and EPS and my ministry as well. So where we're going is just getting the word out, really wanting to see apologetics take root in the church and flourish in a new era of the Christian faith, just being thoughtful believers and being able to engage the public.
And it's needed now more than ever. I'm so excited. Well done. This is so exciting. Now, I want to back up for a minute because I always like to expose our audience just to the testimony. You know, God is not necessarily looking for ability, he's looking for availability. But, you know, how many of us God has spoken to and we didn't move forward? You know, I'm sure there are many listening to this broadcast right now, and we can all think of times that the Holy Spirit spoke to us to move forward in some area, and for whatever reason we resisted. Well, there was a moment in time when God spoke to Mary Jo Sharp, you didn't resist, and now thousands of people are being ministered to because of it. Take us back, whenever that was, to first how you came to Christ. Were you raised in a Christian home? Because Mary Jo, you're debating now. You're taking on Islam as a woman. I mean, do you? Who knows? You might have a fatwa on you right now. Without it, I don't know if you do or not. This is boldness that you're doing. This is empowering. I'm just thrilled of what you're doing, but when did you come to Christ, and then when did you receive this incredible call to engage in the apologetics that are so needed right now, perhaps even needed now more than ever?
Well, I certainly wasn't raised as a Christian. I was actually raised in the Portland, Oregon area. A lot of people don't know that because they hear the name Mary Jo and they think that old show Designing Women. So they think I'm a Southerner by birth, you know, born and raised in the Bible Belt. Actually, I was raised in a very different culture from the South. I would say my upbringing was as a relativist, that I was taught to respect people of all backgrounds, no matter what they believed, and that truth could be found in each one of those. I did not have a particularly Christian upbringing, did not go to church, wasn't raised in the church. And I can tell you that my family taught me to really think for myself and to respect people of all different backgrounds. So really, I had some questions as a teenager. You know, was this all there was, that I was just I say to women, I'll say, I was just a blob of atoms and that's all I amount to. And then eventually I just die and I'm absorbed back into the ground. Is that it? Is that all there is? So I was asking some of those questions of myself, but I also had a high school band director who I admired greatly, obviously, because I became a band director. And he, my senior year, pulled me aside, and he had never given a testimony to anybody about his faith, from what he tells me, that I was the first one. And he said, Mary Jo, when you go off to college, you're going to have some tough questions, and I want you to turn to this. And he gave me a 1 year NIV Bible. And I very much respected him. And since I was already starting to ask some of those questions, I read through that Bible. And when I started reading through the Bible, it totally changed my view of Christianity. I had thought that Christianity was what I saw on TV. I remember the Oh God trilogy with George Burns. You know, that's what I thought about Christianity. And the scandal with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. That's kind of what I thought Christianity was all about, taking people's money, making them feel good about themselves. But that was pretty much it. When I read through that Bible, I began to realize that there was a God who created the universe and that I was accountable to him. Was not ready at that point to become a believer in Jesus Christ. I wasn't really sure about Jesus. And when I went off to college, I did go to a college in Oklahoma. I was invited to a Southern Baptist church, and it was there that I actually understood that I was a sinner. I understood why I needed Jesus Christ, why he had to die on the cross, and I was convicted of my sins at that point. And that's when I became a believer. I was 20 years old. Now, that didn't lead me into apologetics. So do you want me to go to that part?
Please, please.
All right. Well, I got involved with the church, obviously. In fact, I was on fire to learn. And over time, actually, you know, as I got a job and as I got involved with the things of band directing, which were like 70-hour work weeks, I kind of let my Christianity just go by the wayside. Just kind of, I was a good Christian, we would say. You know, I went to church on Sundays and Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I was a participator in Sunday school and a questioner, but I really was not going deep enough with why I believed what I believed. I wasn't really fostering my education at a very deep level. That combined with the fact that after years in ministry and seeing a lot of what I called the ugly in the church, those two things coming together in my life while I was so busy with this band directing and my husband was a music minister who was in seminary, all of that coming together is what created what I call a perfect storm for doubt. And I began to say, oh my goodness, what did I do? Do I have any reason to believe this? Is there really a God? And how do I know that? How do I know that Jesus was resurrected from the dead? And could I say that to anybody? Does anybody have any arguments for that? I didn't know that was apologetics when I started asking those questions and when I started looking for the answers. And quite honestly, I started to read Norm Geisler's book, Christian Apologetics. And after about chapter 1, I put that down. And I'm not real proud to say that, but I did.
Really
and then
helps with insomnia.
Well, I was, you know, at that time in my life, I hadn't been exposed to deep levels of argumentation. And I hadn't even been exposed to mildly deep levels of argumentation for that. So I went to Lee Strobel's books. The Case for Christ was out at that time. And that's what I went through. And once I found who he was interviewing, I went out to all of those people he was interviewing and started reading their works and worked myself up to going back to books like Christian Apologetics, which now I read them and I go, wow, I had troubles with that. But yeah.
Again, I'm talking with Mary Jo Sharp, the founder of Confident Christianity. Mary Jo, your experiences lecturing, writing, teaching, and debating have really been making an impact. You know, I want to ask you this question because you've had a lot of experience in those different realms, both engaging with believers and non-believers. What do you think is the most significant question that people ask about the Christian faith, in your opinion, even experientially?
The question that comes up the most in various forms would be the problem of evil. And not just the problem of evil about, you know, how can you say God's good when I see all this pain and suffering in the world? But the more frequent question is one that I can't just answer philosophically, which is an emotional problem with the problem of evil. It's a person is going through suffering. They have pain and suffering in their own life, and they want to know how this can happen. How God could allow this to happen to them. That's the most frequent one that comes up. And it's very difficult to answer that one because many times the person is not ready for a philosophical argument. a free will theodicy or something like that. They actually just need me to be there for them and walk alongside of them until they're ready for those tougher, arguments. So that's the number one I've encountered out there is the problem of evil and dealing with it emotionally.
That's so true, and I tell you what an answer. And I appeal our audience to a wonderful, a lot of studies that our friend Gary Habermas has done, Mary Jo, and his forthcoming article, When God Gives You the Silent Treatment, that yes, there's lots of promises in the Bible, over 8,000, but there's also lots of problem verses where God didn't necessarily take his followers, both the Israelites in the Old Testament and his church in the New Testament, out of the problem, but kept his presence with them through that problem. And I would appeal to that as well. But what an interesting statement. So the most pressing question that people tend to have about the Christian faith is an emotional issue with the problem of evil. For the benefit of our audience, though, I want to just take another step back, Mary Jo, because we have people watching who are not Christians. We have people who attend CTS every week who are agnostic, who are atheist, and I was having an hour-long dialogue with someone in my extended family the other day about how cool Christian Thinker Society was. At least I think it's cool. And after about an hour, he said, well, wait a minute, what's apologetics? And so I realized that I probably didn't start at square one. Can you just define for our audience what is apologetics? And then my question for you is, you've done some extensive work and really relevant, fresh work. What are some of the main areas confronting apologetics as you see the landscape today?
That's great. Yeah. Apologetics. Well, we kind of rip a word out of the Greek there. It's apologia. And you can find the word in the 1 Peter 3:15. In fact, I think I've seen you talk on this very statement, this very issue about what is apologetics. It's a defense of the Christian faith, and not a defense in the fact that you're being defensive or that you're apologizing for belief, but it's a defense. You're making a case for the Christian faith. You don't just find that in 1 Peter 3:15. You find it through Paul, wherever Paul's making a case for the Christian faith. Acts 17 on Mars Hill. He's also doing it in Acts 26 before King Agrippa. So it's something that you see in the Bible as making a case for the Christian faith. And you can make a positive case, and these are the good reasons to believe in God. You can also have a defensive case in answering arguments against God, against the Bible, against Jesus. So apologetics is simply providing those reasons for the hope that is in you.
What do you think are the biggest areas confronting apologetics right now? And I think this is important for our audience. And if you're watching, you might want to grab a pen for this answer.
The biggest areas confront. It's interesting because, or the main areas, as you said, you would think they would be certain arguments, right? Like, oh, the problem of evil, some argument related to science. Really, through my own experience, and I don't have the statistics on this, but just through talking to people online and in person, one of the main problems facing apologists and Christians is going to be poor reasoning and the wreckage caused by persuasive imagery, excuse me. I actually handle all sorts of poorly constructed arguments when I'm talking to people online. Especially online. I come across people who do not know basic logical fallacies and commit them all the time. In fact, the number one problem that I encounter when I'm trying to have a dialogue with somebody on the Christian faith and the case for the Christian faith is ad hominem. It's attack against the person rather than against their arguments. Simply put, ad hominem could be like when you call names, like I call it junior high name calling, on the playground. That's when you attack that person instead of what they're actually arguing. That's ad hominem, and that's what I deal with the most. The second most is the misperceptions of the Christian faith. Remember what I said about my perception of the Christian faith? It was all like Jim and Tam Faye Baker and Hollywood. Well, here's that persuasive imagery. Media is very persuasive, and all I had ever been exposed to were these sorts of superficial images of Christianity, and that's what a lot of people in our culture have been exposed to. They haven't been exposed to a hard Christian doctrine, essential Christian doctrine. They've really just got what they've got through newspapers, internet, media, Hollywood, TV, and it's not very good. It's very superficial. And what it has done is created a straw man of the historic Christian faith. And I'm doing a lot of work breaking down the straw man first. Instead of making this positive case for Christianity or arguing these deep, philosophical truths, I'm having to break down that straw man that's out there. And that area has that's been very difficult to combat because of the poor reasoning. So I'm having to teach people, even people who are atheist or agnostic, I'm having to hold them accountable to reason well as Christians. I'm having to hold Christians accountable to reason well. And what they don't seem to understand is if God is actually truth, if Jesus is the truth, like he says in John 14:6, then good reasoning and good thinking leads you towards truth. But poor reasoning is going to lead you away from truth. So for Christians, it will lead you closer to God if you reason well. Also for our agnostic atheist friends, skeptical friends, thinking well leads you towards truth. And I believe that will lead you towards God. So those are two of the areas. You want me to keep going?
Yeah, this is excellent material. I'm taking notes.
Okay. Also, an ill regard towards historical truth. People don't seem to have any criteria for what they believe as history, what is actually historically true. And when you talk to them about the historic Christian faith, or you talk to them about maybe the difference between Jesus and Osiris, and you try to establish historical truths, they don't seem to have any regard for that whatsoever. It's whatever their opinion of history is. And it just and you can kind of see that in the comparison people will make between like crusades, and they'll say something like, wow, crusades were awful. Look at what Christians did in the past. They're horrible. And yet they don't compare that to what Stalin did to his own people. They don't seem to have any idea of what happened in world history. So that's another thing that I'm combating in apologetics, is just saying, hey, what are the actual facts that are out there in history? And what's your view of that? I have a personal story about that from college, if you'd like to hear it. I was in a U.S. history class in my undergraduate degree. And I'm not sure if I was a new Christian or if I had been a Christian a while, because I don't remember what year I took it. But my professor was teaching U.S. history according to him. He would only pick the things that he thought were important. And I confronted him and I said, you've left out, like in suffrage, you left out the Women's Temperance Union, which was a Christian organization that backed women's suffrage. Why are you leaving these major things out that are Christian backed? And, even the Christians that were involved in the civil rights movement, you just completely leave these things out. And he says, well, I just don't have time to put everything in there. So selective historical truth as well. By the way, I wrote back in my final essay, I wrote everything back in there. I included all those organizations that were Christian that worked in civil rights and human rights areas, because that bothered me, that we were being so selective. So just kind of like a ill regard towards history, and also unreasonable requirements for evidence. Coming across unreasonable requirements.
This is huge.
Yeah. I believe this comes from Carl Sagan. Not just him, not only Carl Sagan, but he's one of the guys that really pushed this forward with his glowing cross in the sky argument from Contact, his book Contact he wrote in, I believe it was 1985. And he asked for irrefutable proof of God's existence. And I'm going to use some of what John Bloom, he's a professor at Biola University, some of what he had to say on this issue. He says, that responding or asking for irrefutable proof as a scientist, he wanted to give what's an analogy of what that's like in the scientific world? And he said it was like asking for a scientist who's studying, the universe to go out and grab a galaxy and bring it back into the lab in order for us to do laboratory experiments on it, in order for us to have irrefutable proof that there are such things as galaxies. And he said, this is just ridiculous. What a scientist needs to do is they need to look at the evidence that is available. And then they need to say, is this data clear enough to be significant? And not just, hey, I want irrefutable data. Because if we had ideal data on everything, man, what would we, if that's, let me rephrase that. If all we ever would research and look into is the areas in which we have ideal data, we're going to shut down a lot of inquiry in the scientific field. And he felt like, John Bloom felt like that's what Carl Sagan was asking for, is irrefutable proof of Jesus, and instead of looking at the evidence available. So we should be looking at things like the moral law, the evidence for the resurrection, the existence of logic, and the fact that we say we have a knowable universe. Those are some of the things we should be looking at and saying, wow, there's some evidence out there that points towards a creator. So those are some of the areas that I deal with that are most difficult in addressing apologetics. They come up most often, whereas I would like to address the arguments. Most of the time I'm dealing with those things, the lack of reasoning, disregard for history, and the wanting irrefutable proof, or as I said, the unreasonable requirements for evidence.
Well, and that's a great answer, Mary Jo, because I think we have to all learn to think better, and that's one of the ethos of Christian Thinker Society, is inspiring Christians to become thinkers and thinkers to become Christian. There's such a misnomer in the church today because of the lack of quality with the teaching in many of our churches that, becoming a Christian, we just check our brain at the door. And yet, hearing from someone like yourself, we see some of the brightest minds engaged today are Christians, and they're doing fabulous research, fabulous scholarship, pushing the discussion forward. And these notes that we've taken and that I pray our audience has taken are just fabulous. And I also like the accountability mechanism of not just making sure that we do good Christian apologetics, but we keep the dialogue pure with even our dialogue and debate partners who may be agnostics or just unbelievers, atheists, to make sure we can stay on point. This is something I experienced at Oxford in all my doctoral seminars. They don't result to ad hominem at all. It's not an English thing to do. They may disagree with you, but they would never attack the person. It's very much North American geographically, and yet you cross the pond and they'll immediately attack you. They don't like what you look like. They don't like what you sound like, that you're too arrogant or you're too bashful, and so they don't like your argument. And so it's interesting, and yet they have a whole different bag of tricks over there with their debates. And so, I find this just incredible. And I think it's something we need to hear a lot more of, because we've all been in situations where we know we could have said things better, learning to reason with greater forcefulness, but also with a lot more class and dignity. So way to go, Mary Jo. I've got another question, because I really want to focus about fresh approaches when it comes to apologetics. And you've done a lot of extensive studies with Islam, and specifically the treatment of women in Islamic religion. And this is something that, as you say, the media will never report on. Many Christians are just sorely inept when it comes to understanding what Islam really understands, what the Quran really has to say about women. Can you just talk to us for a minute, because I know this is going to blow some people right out of their seats, about some of the distinctions, women's rights in Islam, men and female and male equality in Islam, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to give you the platform now and just share with us your passions in these areas, and then how we can use this information as an evangelistic tool.
All right. Well, the issue of women in Islam, what has really attracted me to this is when I watch like ABC's 2020, and I see them go after, I think it was Barbara Walters, and she went after this issue, and she talked about how she was going to go really deep and ask these really hard questions. So when I saw the result of that, I thought, boy, this is really poor. Of course, we Christians understand that, because every time they've done it to Christianity, we always go shake our heads and go, wow, that was awful. Same thing with Islam. So I started going into, what does Islamic theology actually teach according to the three major sources for Islam, the Sirah literature, the Quran, and the Hadith. And when I went there, when I started looking in there, I saw that what was being portrayed through the media about Islam fitting right in with Western ideology was completely wrong. Muhammad was unapologetically a 6th century man who had 6th century views of women according to what the cultural views were in the Arabian Peninsula, contrasting Jesus, who had radical ideology about women. So when I look at what Muhammad actually said, I see that he, for instance, some areas about a woman's ontology, what is she in creation? What was she made like? And I see that she was actually made with, she's a little bit lower than man. Man is superior to her. And Muhammad's not ashamed about saying that in the Quran, that men are a degree above women. They actually excel women. And also that she has about half the intellect of a man. And that one I want to focus on in Surah 2:282. Muhammad is discussing how you go about making a fixed contract for a debt. And you have to get witnesses for a fixed contract. Well, you can either get one man or you can get two women. Now, the reason for the two women is because one of them might forget. Now, I've had Muslims say, well, that doesn't sound too bad, so she's forgetful. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Why I make a big deal out of this is when you go to Muhammad's interpretation of that passage in Sahih Muslim 142, you see him being asked by a woman about his vision that women are a majority in hell. Let me say that again. Women make up the majority of hell in Islam. And so this woman asked Muhammad, why is it that women make up a majority of hell? What's wrong with women? And he goes back to Surah 2:282 on this fixed contract statement that a woman's mind is deficient. He said that a woman ends up in hell because of the deficiency of her mind. And he says, then he quotes that passage, you can tell because of her witness being worth half of a man. So that to me that's very disturbing, how a woman is actually going to end up in hell because of how God created her as a little lower than men. And that's the reason for why she ends up in hell. There are other passages that we're a little bit more familiar with, such as the beating of women in Islam. And obviously that comes up quite frequently on news and in discussions about Islam. Can a woman actually be beaten? And well, yes, she can. Muhammad in Surah 4:34 said, as for those from whom you fear rebellion, admonish them, banish them to beds apart, and scourge them. Yusuf Ali actually takes this passage and he gives you first you admonish them, and then secondly, you abstain from sexual relations. He says you separate to beds apart, and lastly, you beat them. And Yusuf Ali puts a lightly in there. Now, this does two things. It establishes that man in Islam is the discipliner, much like a parent to a child. There's a set pattern of discipline that you would admonish her if you fear rebellion from her. Then you don't have sexual relationships with her. And then finally, the last punishment is that you scourge or beat her. And my Arabic right now is not that good, but the word is idreb, and it's translated scourge or beat 8 out of the 10 translations that I have looked at. So what you're hearing today is this is just a light tap. It's like a no. And that's totally out of context because he's set up an order there. It's the last punishment. It's supposed to be worse than admonishing her, worse than abstaining from sexual relationships. It also sets up that standard of one's a discipliner and one's the disciplinee, like a parent to child. And those are my major concerns. I'm not the only one concerned. Muhammad's wife, Aisha, was actually concerned about the beating of women in Islam. And she says in Sahih al-Bukhari that Muhammad she brought a woman to Muhammad whose skin had been beaten greener than her clothing. And she states that the Muslim women are suffering. The believers are suffering more than any other woman. I brought that up in a debate I had on this issue at a mosque. And the Muslim debater's response was, but that woman was lying. Wow. Jeremiah, wow. There is nothing in the New Testament to establish anything like this, where a man can beat a woman because she lied. He can physically beat her to where her skin looks greener than her clothing. So these are the deeply disturbing issues in Islam, and we're just hitting the surface of this that I believe we need to be talking about as the difference between Christianity and its philosophical outworking and Islam and what we see there. So that I just to give you a taste of Islam and the view of women conversation.
And I think this is important. I mean, I remember doing a Bible Lands tour in Turkey and going to the city of Konya, Iconium, formerly. Those of you who know the New Testament will know that city from the book of Acts, and where they have the whirling dervishes. In the city of Konya, they also have Muhammad's hair from Muhammad's beard. And I remember going in to see it at quite a demonic place, and I'll never forget just a multitude of women around Muhammad's hair crying, physically shaking around it, just weeping around it, so devoted to this essentially Islamic relic. And then I read these examples in the Quran where women are just treated as sexual objects, as sexual slaves. The degeneration of women, that they're an evil omen, they're an affliction they're an evil omen. Hadith 7:30 and 31. Women are an affliction to men. Hadith 7:33. I mean, we could talk about this all afternoon. Men excel women in every area, as you said, Mary Jo. Quran 4:34. Men are in charge of women because Allah hath made the one of them to excel over the other.
There you go. That's the one.
Quran 4:24 and 25. Forbidden women already married, except what your right hand possesses slaves. Muhammad, according to Hadith 7:64 and 88, the Prophet married her when she was 6 years old and consummated his marriage when she was 9. People just don't know this stuff because they don't read the Quran. I have the Quran here in my library. And I just think it's important because we view that then through the lens of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, and we see how Jesus honored women. We see how Jesus treated the women. We see how fresh and new that was, as you said. And can you talk for a minute about Christ and how revolutionary his treatment of women must have been? And we see that it was women at the tomb. We see the New Testament authors. I mean, we see immediately the contrast of the Quran putting women down. I found this interesting passage last night. Hadith 7:113. The woman is like a rib. If you try to straighten her, she'll break. She is crooked. And yet we look at the New Testament, and who is it who gives us the appearance testimony of our resurrected Lord? Women. I just think it's powerful. And Mary Jo, can you just talk for a minute to our viewers who are watching about the power of Christianity, that Jesus empowered women for the call of salvation as well?
Yeah, I first want to address that, but I do also want to mention, because this will come up, that what we're doing, we're not being hateful towards Muslims. Okay, it's not because we're going into the theology doesn't mean that we don't love the person. It actually establishes very high respect for a person when we take their theology and we discuss it with them. And so that's what I want to get this feeling that we need to get this out on the table, and we need to talk about it out of a great respect for Muslim people as being people made in the image of God. So that's why this comes up, and that's why it's on the plate, because East has met West, and we're going to have to address these issues. Now, on the subject of Christ, there are many passages in which you can find where Jesus very highly uplifts the woman. One of my favorite passages is from Ephesians 5. Where Paul is talking about how a man and a woman come together and as one flesh. And he says that the man is to treat the woman as if she were his own body. Okay, that's in that whole context of submission of the wife to the husband. It's in the context of the man respecting her in the sense as if it was. And he even goes on to say that nobody not beats their own body, but nobody's going to neglect their own body, but they're going to take care of it. And that's what Paul's saying. That's the equality of men and women there. They are as one flesh. And it's like you brought up, one of the things I brought up in the debate was, let's look at the ultimate comparison here of the testimony of women in Islam being half of a man's. You can't even trust her to testify on a fixed debt contract, right? But then you see in the Gospels that the women are the ones that are given the message first. They're the ones that testify first, not just to something, but to the foundational doctrine of the Christian faith. This is a huge difference. This is a huge, huge difference on how God views women in both of these belief systems. And then I try to keep going with this in that Jesus, when he's asked a question about the ultimate end in the Christian faith, which is the resurrection, the new heavens and the new earth. And in Matthew 22, he's asked a question from the Sadducees about a woman who's been married several times and whose wife is she in heaven? And Jesus responds with, they are not given in marriage in heaven. They're more like the angels. I don't have a huge background in angels, but I'm guessing gender's not all that important up there. And the important thing is that you are in the presence of God, that you are perfected in that time. And what I see with Islam is that in their version of paradise, it's still about the wife being submissive to the man in these roles as established on the earth. They carry over into the afterlife, and she's still there to provide him sexual pleasure, there to wait on him as Khadijah did. And it's just a myriad of difference when you look at what Jesus said was the ultimate goal for the believer in him in the resurrection, and then how he viewed women and how they're the first to testify of the resurrection. And again, and then with Paul and his one, they are as one. He is to treat her as if she was himself. Huge difference between Christianity and Islam.
And these polemics are so important for our viewers who are watching. They're important because you never hear it in the mainstream media. This is incredible truth you're giving us, Mary Jo. Thank you. I mean, I'm reminded that the Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus had wealthy women who traveled with him. I'm reminded of Acts 16 of Lydia, the seller of purple at Thyatira, who literally opened the gospel to Europe for the Apostle Paul. And we see again and again examples of how God strategically has always used women for his ultimate purpose, for his kingdom. And I just think it's powerful. I could listen to you all day talk about this. I know you've done extensive work on it, but we must move on. You're implementing, I want to talk about this forthcoming book that you have with Kriegel Publications. Very exciting work. As I said at the intro, it's not just some academic ivory tower thing, theoretical. This is working. It's case studies that are actually working in the church. You're really serving as a model really for other ministries to follow, pastors who are watching Christian Thinker Society right now. If you want to really talk about engaging women in ministry, this is a part you really should be paying attention to. Tell us about your forthcoming book and about these strategies for using apologetics specifically for women in the church.
All right. Well, thank you for asking. The book is, the working title is Women, Truth, and Apologetics, A New Era in Women's Ministry. And what I never expected for this to happen, by the way. I was just doing apologetics, making a case for the Christian faith. And then there was a leader in the state of Texas in the Southern Baptist Convention that said, hey, women in our state need this. They need to know why they believe what they believe and have good reasons for it. So I want to bring you on board and have you work with us across the state of Texas. So what I have found is that here we have all these great ministries already in existence. These women's ministries that have this great fellowship and they're organized and established. And it's like God has this all set up, and now we just get to come in and introduce them to the reasoning of the faith, and they're catching on like wildfire. They're excited about this. And that surprised me. I didn't expect that response. In fact, when I saw women starting to respond to my messages of, hey, we need to get deeper, we need to know why we believe, we need to engage the unbelieving community, they were coming up to me going, thank you. This is exactly what I was looking for. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond to that because it wasn't something that I actually expected to have happen. And yet here in Texas, we're just catching on like wildfire. Now, what I'm doing is I'm discussing with women why it's so important that you do deal with the issue of why women believe in God. Gary Habermas actually has dealt with this in an article called Dealing with Doubt. He talks about how doubt in the church is possibly one of the greatest problems that we have to deal with, doubting God in some way. And that's something that we haven't really hit on in the women's ministries, as far as I know. So one of the things that we can do is we can help women in the church deal with their doubts and deal with their hard questions about their faith in God and build up that confidence by providing them answers in this safe environment that they have. I mean, the church is the greatest place for us to encounter these questions and these difficult issues about our beliefs in God, because we already, like I said, we already have the fellowship established, and now we can come into this safe learning environment and we can get some answers to our questions without feeling like we have to be put on the spot out in public, you know. Of course, I want to see that be the ultimate goal, that women are confident when they step out into public speaking with others about their faith. And boy, I see a huge potential here for impacting our communities in our world for Christ through getting these women's ministries also excited about the study of the defense of their faith and getting them involved.
This is so exciting. I mean, this is what really gets my spiritual engines ignited, because this is a gap right now in the church. This is an area that we have to see forward movement. I mean, this is what we're seeing right now in the secular communities, the elevation of women in every area, in businesses and politics, and yet the church is so backwards. So it's like it's a whole forgotten segment. And that's why I'm so excited for Mary Jo Sharp, Confident Christianity, and your ministry, because women are dynamic and their ministry is needed now more than ever. Men have checked out wholesale. We need women not only in the church but in our families. We need women to adopt other kids, children of other latchkey kids. The ministry of women is probably one of the most vital ministries. I can think of the ministry my own mother has had in my own life, a Christian mother. It's irreplaceable. And I just want to thank God for you. And I want to ask you this question with that answer. Do you think that apologetics is needed now more than ever today? Why or why not? Because there's some people listening that say, oh, you know, that's a neat sideline ministry. You know, we'll do that if budget allows next year. But you know, I believe it's needed now more than ever. But I'm interested to hear from all your vast experience if you think it's needed now more than ever.
Oh yeah, I think it has always been needed. It should never have left the church. When you see Paul doing it when you see Paul making a case in Acts 17 and 26, and really from Acts 14 on, there's no reason it should have ever left. So that being the scriptural reason for why we should be doing it. But also, in our culture, it's very much needed, specifically because of what I mentioned about the poor reasoning that we're going to encounter, and also with the misperceptions of the Christian faith. We really need to be available to answer those misperceptions and to question people. I think what Christians have gotten into in the Christian faith is that they're like, whatever you believe for you, that's great. You know, you believe this, and if you can tell somebody the gospel, that's fabulous. What they forget is that those people we're talking to, they have a view too. They also have a view that needs substantiated. And as Christians who say that we have the truth, we ought to be asking people why they believe what they believe and how they have gotten to the point where they think it's true. This is a vital part of evangelism. This is a vital part of the gospel message, is getting others to reason for themselves how they've gotten to the point they've gotten to. Partially for me, this is my public school teaching background, in that here's some educational psychology, right? If I can get somebody else to understand the problems with their own thinking and they start to see it for themselves, they own it. They'll own it. It'll be their own. But if I just tell them something, you know, they might choose to say, hey, that's pretty good, or I'll think about that later. But once they can see for themselves the problems, that light bulb goes off and they got it. So that should be just as much a part of the gospel message as maybe like in the past when we've had a standard set. You say these 5 things and all that. I really think that the gospel message should be more of a natural outflow of the Christian's life, of who they are and what they believe, which is why it's so important, Jeremiah, that we get people to know for themselves in the church why they believe what they believe. So that way, when they walk out of their church setting, when they get out of their bubble with their Christian friends, they're confident. They can talk to people no matter where they are or who they're talking to. whether it's a PhD in neuroscience or it's just the guy next door works down at the shop, you know, auto shop, that they can feel confident to talk to whoever, whenever. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. And we've been talking with Mary Jo Sharp, a delightful interview tonight at Christian Thinkers Society, founder of Confident Christianity. And I just want to appeal to our audience for a moment. Here is Mary Jo Sharp, not raised in a Christian home, coming to faith in Christ at the age of 20. Nominal Christian faith until she comes on fire for God, begins reasoning for herself. A band teacher in a public school setting whom God speaks to her heart to take a step of faith and start to do something to engage culture. And I want to right now reach out to our audience and say, God can't wait till football season's over for you to get committed. God can't wait till the dance practice is over and the recitals are over and the finances are over and you're out of debt. God wants your commitment right now. I'm thinking of Jude 3 in the Greek, epigenizomai, continue to attack. We are to contend for the faith. He said in Jude that I really want to write to you about the wonderful salvation we have, but I have to tell you, continue to attack for the faith. And so we've been listening to this wonderful example tonight of Mary Jo Sharp. She's an inspiration to all of us, but I'm now reaching out my spirit to those of you watching. How many more are listening to this broadcast? God's been speaking at your heart to do something. I hope that you'll go to Confident Christianity, their website. I hope you'll write Mary Jo Sharp and say, I want to be involved. I want to support your ministry. I want to bring you to my church. I want to encourage you. Do it right now as soon as you hear the end of this broadcast. Mary Jo, tell us how we can follow you, website, Twitter, Facebook, and then finally tell us how we can follow you and then pray for you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you asking that. My Facebook, you can follow me on Facebook. Just put Mary Jo Sharp in there. Make sure the Jo is right next to the Mary. That's how you find me. You can also follow my page on Facebook, which is Confident Christianity. And we've got about 2,000 so people on there, and we're having some great conversations right now. So there, you can follow me there. On Twitter, you can follow me as well, Mary Jo Sharp. Actually, I gotta say this, it's kind of funny. My husband is better at keeping our fans up to date than I am on Twitter. So Roger Sharp is a person you might want to follow on Twitter to find out what Confident Christianity is doing. And I believe he has an underscore between Roger and Sharp for his Twitter. Also on iTunes, we have a podcast, Confident Christianity, so you can hear some of my discussions on the pagan myth theory and Jesus, also on the issue of implementing apologetics in women's ministry. And then I have some on there about dialoguing with people and ways that you can engage in dialogue without being confrontational, and just something that's good for our life practice in general and how to talk to people. So there's some great stuff on there. You can also follow my blog at maryjosharp.com. That's a great place to find out what we're doing and see the latest things that I'm working on. Also, did you ask how you can pray for us?
Yes, please. Let us know how we can pray for you.
Thank you. Prayer is so important. And I think especially people like myself, we forget, because I was raised basically a naturalist, that there is a spiritual realm and that it is affected through our prayers, and that we need your prayers because we come up against a lot of difficult situations and people who are going through difficult situations. So please continue to pray for us. That's where the power is. And as you mentioned, if you'd like to support our ministry, that would be great. We need those monthly donors in order to keep going in what we're doing, because Apologetics doesn't have like a specific job where you work at a company. So I'm basically a missionary to North America and hopefully eventually out to the world as well. Obviously, we're doing that through the internet. But if you'd like to support us, there is a donation button. We have a campaign going right now in which you can help us through PayPal. So it's very easy to do.
Mary Jo, we definitely will continue to pray for you, support you, and bless you. And I hope you'll come back, because I'd love to do a whole nother program on these pagan mystery religions and the whole subject of that as it relates to Jesus' story being borrowed, as the many skeptics say. So I know you've done extensive work. This interview's been a delight.
Oh,
And I'm just so excited about how God's continuing to use you. Thanks for your time in this interview, and come back and see us, okay?
oh, definitely, definitely.